Getting harder and harder to get away with the grift in the age of Doge. Another headline from Revolver News. Lindsey Graham's latest backstabbing move is people calling on Doge to investigate his finances. Word on the street is that Doge is about to dive headfirst into the wild and unruly Ukraine funding. Welcome news to many Americans who are sick and tired of watching their hard-earned tax dollars get used to fight a war that Ukraine cannot win and has no intention of ending ever. Elon Musk is under the belief that US politicians are getting kickbacks for supporting the funding for Ukraine's war with Russia. Debbie O tweeting, why is there so much funding for the Ukraine in the Senate's budget proposal? Elon Musk, kickbacks. No one should be surprised about possible kickbacks, especially considering the obscene amount of money we've funneled into the Ukraine, with zero oversight, absolutely no accountability, just a blank check for who knows what. Many believe this entire war is nothing more than a massive money laundering scheme. Eric Matinee. Look at this heartwarming footage of American politicians signing FEMA aid packages for Americans in North Carolina. Just kidding, they're signing weapons of war for Ukraine. You bloodthirsty bastards. May all of the deaths of our innocent brothers and sisters be on your souls for all eternity. You psychopaths. May God damn you all to hell. Can you blame Americans for being suspicious of this Ukraine scam? And speaking of the so-called war, where is the real footage from the front lines? Not the early propaganda clips, some of which turned out to be straight out of a video game. Why are there no reporters embedded with the military? Eric Matinee also tweeting, I remember back in 1990 when we had a fraction of the technology we had today, watching continuous coverage of the Gulf War on television. Where is the footage out of the Ukraine? It doesn't exist because the Ukrainians are getting their asses handed to them by the Russians. Of course, then again, the Russians aren't faring too well either. They're having to bring in troops from North Korea. One of the biggest warhawks keeping this racket alive is none other than Lindsey Graham. He is so determined to bankroll Zelensky's little war that he is now actively undermining President Trump at every turn. Not only is he pushing to hand over billions more, he's also cozying up to Zelensky with little chats. MAGA has taken notice and is now calling for Doge to dig into Lindsey's finances. From Nick Sauter, what the fuck? Why is Rhino Warhawk Lindsey Graham undermining President Trump and talking to dictator Zelensky? Graham is attempting to force President Trump to give tens of billions more in aid to Ukraine, and now he's going behind Trump's back to do it. Doge should dig deep into Lindsey Graham. Well, yeah, the regions of Scandinavia and North Germany, lowlands, did invade Britain, even settled in Britain back in history, so there probably is Germanic DNA floating around. Oh yes, wouldn't surprise me in the least. A lot of people from the United Kingdom who have those sort of, I guess, the Ancestry DNA or MyHeritage DNA test done, that's usually what it reveals, is at least a little bit of Germanic DNA. A close-up of Zelensky's post. I spoke with U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. We greatly appreciate the bicameral bipartisan support of the U.S. Congress to the Ukrainian people in our fight against Russian aggression. Here's what people online saying about Lindsey's latest backstabbing move. Time to look at Lindsey's finances. Queen Lindsey is owned by whoever has videos of him acting out his fantasies. Audit him. It's almost an open secret at this point that Lindsey Graham is a homosexual, albeit closeted, and probably has some rather sick, twisted, perverted sexual preferences. And more than likely there is plenty of compromat on him. Why else would he be doing all of this? Lady Lindsey has always been doing this. He's a slimy little traitorous snake. Follow the Ukraine money and I guarantee your Lady G has a large offshore account somewhere. Isn't this a direct violation of the Logan Act, which prevents U.S. senators and other non-executive citizens from engaging in foreign negotiations on behalf of the U.S. without authorization? He is getting millions from wars. Remember when Zelensky went to Pennsylvania to campaign for the Democrats? And what was Elon's response to this post? No words, just one very well-placed emoji. After that, Lindsay might actually sit down and be quiet for a change. The good news is President Trump knows exactly what he's up against, as he pointed out in his Truth Social post, exposing Lindsay's Ukraine First bill. In one of the two Senate funding bills, Lindsey Graham wants to fund the war in Ukraine till 2030. On November 5th, did we or did we not vote for not one more dollar for Ukraine? This disastrous bill comes courtesy of two notorious rhinos, Lindsey Graham and John Thune. Includes a staggering $48 billion more for Ukraine. And this is not what the American people voted for, and Senator Thune knows it. No wonder Lindsay is huddling up with Zelensky. There is a fortune on the line, and our oh-so-humble elected officials are probably eyeing the next infinity pool. Perhaps Lindsay, Thune, and the rest of the Ukraine war cheerleaders are just waiting for their next round of accounting error kickbacks. DC Drano tweeting, insane. The Pentagon announces an overpayment of $6.2 billion to Ukraine and calls it an accounting error. How much you want to bet a good chunk of that accounting error landed in the pockets of Ukrainian oligarchs? Let's not forget, Zelensky just admitted to losing $100 billion of US taxpayer money, yet he still has the gall to demand another $250 billion. This little man has zero respect for the American worker. He just sees this as his personal piggy bank, ready to be raided whenever he pleases, with zero accountability. War Clandestine tweeting, I'm still in shock over this post. Trump openly called Zelensky a dictator and called out the entire Ukraine war as a massive deep state money laundering operation. I've been saying this for 3 years now, and the mainstream media called me a Russian asset and traitor. The world is healing. Here's the Truth Social post from President Trump. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Vladimir Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that could not be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the US and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization, in that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast, but he's not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace. Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky's done a terrible job, his country's shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. And so it continues. There are unconfirmed reports suggesting that Ukraine has now blocked Truth Social. If true, how very democratic of Zelensky, because nothing says freedom like silencing dissent. Isn't that right, Joe Biden? And there were talks earlier this week. I actually tweeted about this, or retweeted something. There it is. From Alex Barnicoat. Earlier this week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the Russian foreign minister to try and finally stop the war in Ukraine. So what was achieved? They first spoke about Ukraine. According to the US, both sides agreed they will appoint high-level teams to end the conflict in Ukraine sustainably. Both countries are reopening their embassies in the other. That was something else that a lot of people forgot about, is that both the US and Russia closed their embassies. When that happens, chat, that is very bad. You usually only close the embassy as a precursor to all-out war. So the reopening of embassies and everyone getting to the table and just sitting down and talking to one another, these are very encouraging signs. The meeting lasted for about 4 hours. Russia's attaché there saying the meetings went very well. Rubio saying it was an important step. Ukraine not invited to the talks. Zelensky instead went over to Turkey to have his own meeting with the Ukrainian, or with the Turkish Premier, Erdogan, to discuss prisoner exchanges and other issues. So all in all, very good sign. Meanwhile, we have this from Zero Hedge. Russia says it has retaken approximately 64% of Kursk territory, lost after the Ukraine offensive. Ukraine's Zelensky previously signaled he hopes to get territory in the Donbass back from Russia by swapping it in return for Kursk. The high-risk offensive began in early August of last year and has resulted in dozens of towns, hundreds of square kilometers brought under Ukrainian military occupation. But in a status update issued Friday, Russia's military declared that most of the territory has since been taken back, saying 65% of what is lost has been regained. More than 800 square kilometers, or 309 square miles. That's according to the first deputy head of Russia's general staff. They said currently the initiative in the Kursk region is fully on the Russian side. Russian forces are advancing in all areas. Around 75% of Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson are now held by Russia in the east of Ukraine. Ukrainian forces at this point control less than 1% of the eastern Luhansk region. Sergei Rudskoy, the first deputy head of the general staff in Russia, said the Kiev regime will not be able to significantly change the situation on the battlefield anymore. The cross-border offensive into Kursk was always meant to force the Kremlin to divide its forces in order to defend the land. But this by and large has not happened. In other words, Putin has not taken the bait. Instead, there have long been reports that thousands of North Korean troops have assisted Russian forces in seeking to take it back, but Moscow has not appeared to be in a hurry, and has not sacrificed its gains in Donetsk to make it happen. Russia's defense ministry has made frequent statements highlighting Ukraine's immense losses, trying to hold the seized Kursk territory over the last several weeks, stressing it is Zelensky who has gotten the worst end of the gambit. Some Russian sources have claimed that Ukraine has lost some 50,000 troops during the invasion of Russian territory. The huge cross-border operation has been pushed back slowly by the Russian side, and the momentum is clearly in the favor of Moscow. I do believe, chat, once the dust settles, once the talks have concluded, once the peace accord is signed, whatever territory Russia has gained, in particular ethnic Russian lands in the east of Ukraine, they're going to keep them. Same with Crimea. That was ethnically Russian land that should never have been transferred over to Ukraine. That was a stupid move by, I believe it was Nikita Khrushchev back in the days of the Soviet Union. But these are ethnically Russian lands, so they belong in Russian hands. It's the same with a lot of ethnic lands across Europe. Post-World War I, everything was divided up on political lines rather than ethnic lines. And so many of the conflicts you saw post-war, and even post-Cold War, were the result of that. I think that was one of the ultimate fallacies of the whole magic soil mentality. Didn't they give away certain areas so they had a right to attack them or something? I don't know which areas you're referring to specifically, Lux, but yeah, I don't know. All I know is that all I have as my prediction is that ethnic Russian lands in the east of Ukraine, probably even some portions of the north of Ukraine, I believe those are going to stay in Russian hands. And what the future looks like as far as a border with Ukraine, I don't know, hard to say. For a long time, after the Orange Revolution in 2014, was that the Orange Revolution? I don't know. After the uprising in 2014, we basically saw a demilitarized zone set up in the Donbass. A sort of no man's land in between Western Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine. I think portions of it even got mined, though I'm not 100% on that. All I know is it was quite dangerous to even attempt to travel through there. But this madness has to stop. And if that means Russia keeping territory it has taken in this conflict, so be it. Particularly if there are ethnic Russians on that land. And if those ethnic Russians have been there historically, let them keep it. There was... good video here from podcast The Lotus Eaters. I think they're talking about this. Adjust the volume here. This is called The New European Carve-Up. It's from the podcast The Lotus Eaters. Let's take a look.
You're all so wonderful. You watching the podcast right now, thinking to yourself, would Harry be my friend in real life? As long as you're buying the merch. Yes.
Friendship comes with a price.
Me wearing an Islander branded Lotus Eaters t-shirt. Any of the variety that we have right here, this beautiful metal one, the Islander Forestry Co., a Calvin Robinson t-shirt, I'll look at you and go, that's a man I can trust. If
Hell
you're
yeah.
not,
God bless Calvin.
we might have a problem.
The funniest thing is, right, Harry's exactly the same on the podcast as he's off the podcast.
That's good, though.
So, like,
What you see is
he's
what you
a very
get.
friendly chap, and he probably would be your friend even if you weren't. You should definitely go buy her merch. That was a great sales pitch.
Don't let them know. Don't let them know. They need to buy the shirts, okay? Especially because this is the last day.
Yeah.
I think I've been told. We'll see how that sticks to next week. But I've been told that this is the last day that we're selling them. So you only have one opportunity left.
I love that
to be my
poster
friend.
for England.
Anyway.
Great sales. I should be using that. Should be using that. Sorry, go on.
No. Okay. On to more serious news. So we covered a little bit of this yesterday in Nate's segment when he was talking about the prospects of Britain putting troops on the ground in Ukraine to...
Oh, yes, that's another thing. Now, apparently, two-tier care wants to send young British lads and lasses off to die in a pointless, prolonged war in Ukraine. And most people are already saying, hell no, we won't go. And jolly good for them for doing that. Because, I mean, it's not worth it. It's a pointless war. They have no intention of winning. It's just a gigantic money laundering campaign that they're trying to prolong the grift as much as possible. And more cynically, I think the Labour government just sees the youth in Britain as a load of problem children. And so they're thinking, we could get rid of this problem in one fell swoop. Let's just send them off to die in a pointless war. Done and dusted, problem solved. Let's just send them all to their deaths in a stupid, pointless war. That way we reduce the population, we can make up the difference by bringing in more migrants who are more than likely just going to vote Labour anyways once we give them easy access to citizenship. And there you have it. Problem solved. The uppity underclasses, they all get killed in the war. We bring in a new permanent underclass of people who are more subservient and more compliant and keep us in power. I mean, it really is diabolical, psychopathic stuff when you think about it. Not. Welcome in, Stoner Stone. I think they're wrong about that. They're going to vote independent. I wouldn't be too sure. So many of the immigrants, they tend to skew towards Labour, or they tend to skew towards the smaller, but no doubt growing members of Islamic nationalist parties. They're being used and they don't even realize it. Yeah, a lot of them don't. Been lurking like your last streams, but saw Carl and wanted to meme. No problem, Stan. When they have enough numbers, they'll ditch them. Yeah, probably. I mean, it's one of those things where they'll have served their purpose. And then they'll just bring in the next potential underclass. But it really is just so disturbing and quite ghoulish that that's just how they look at people. As just tools, a means to an end. Cannon fodder to be sent off to die in some stupid, pointless war. This is who is ruling over Britain. This is who has hijacked England. This is who has brought things to the absolute height of insanity in Scotland which I've got a video about that I saved on Twitter. We'll get to that later. But let's keep going with this.
Guarantee any kind of peace deal that's made by the US and Ukraine, the US and Russia, because Ukraine is not really at the table right now, which kind of shows the hand, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's like, why even bother having Zelensky at the table? Because he is just going to continue to throw a spanner in the works, behave like a child, demand more money, undermine all the progress that is being made. Meanwhile, the adults in the room, the United States and Russia, they're the only ones that seem sincere about having a lasting peace. But it also becomes clear that Ukraine is not in the room, because we all know they're just a proxy for the American and Western deep state.
This has not been a Ukraine-Russia conflict. This has been another, in a almost century-long series of conflicts between the US and Russia, with Ukraine acting as somewhat of a proxy. But it looks like we're reaching the end of that now. Certainly the end of the US involvement in it, and they're going to want to make sure Europe sticks to whatever deals are made. So I think it's worth going over and looking at what's going on, what has the ultimate cost and results, what's been achieved in this conflict. And I also wanted to just look as well at a little bit of the historical precedent and parallels that this has as well, because it seems to be an attempt to re-establish, not even necessarily re-establish, but establish the world order going forwards. Where will the US be? Where will Russia be? Where will Europe be? Because Europe...
Yeah, that's something else that we have to consider with all of this, is that what comes out of these peace talks will determine the direction of the general world order. You could say, in a manner of speaking, it will be a new world order. But more broadly, the shape of things to come for the rest of the 21st century and probably even into the 22nd century.
Europe is currently scrambling under the threat of no longer being able to rely on America as much. And, you know, we have been relying on America for a long time, mainly due to America establishing itself as global hegemon following the Second World War. But because we've been so reliant on them, we're weak.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
Yep.
I mean, he's not wrong. Europe, the United Kingdom, even the remnants of the British Empire in the form of the Commonwealth, all have been just grown fat and weak due to American dominance and due to American commitments to sort of police the world. But we now know that's all untenable. Each nation is going to have to look after their own. I worry for the United Kingdom, and especially for the Commonwealth countries. Many of them will be all right. You know, Singapore, a shining example of a Commonwealth nation, that they take care of their own. They do a bloody good job of it too. And they've turned their tiny little city-state island into an economic powerhouse. The same can't really be said so much for other Commonwealth nations. But everyone's going to have to start looking after their own and taking care of their own. Because, as we British have discovered, and as the Americans are discovering, empires are expensive. And eventually they get too expensive to keep up. Isn't the Commonwealth more of a support group nowadays? Yeah, I'd say that's fairly accurate. But they used to be part of what was known as the British Empire. Things were a bit more centralized, we'll say. There was more of a direct hand placed on the direction of those countries. Nowadays, it's a bit more decentralized. Nowadays, things are fairly well decided, but still, it seems as most Western-aligned countries, particularly the closer you get to Europe, but they all think, oh, the Americans will protect us. Oh, leave it in the hands of the Americans. They'll take care of it. And so what we're seeing is the whinging and temper tantrums of spoiled, petulant children who are just up in arms saying, what do you mean we have to take care of this ourselves? What do you mean? What do you mean we have to start paying for our own defense? We want to put that into social programs that keep us politicians in power, while suppressing speech from native-born members of the population and putting them in prison every time they question why there's so many migrants coming into this country. I get people like to bash empires, but I rather take an empire over the crap we have nowadays. Nothing right gets done. There's no backbones. They let everyone walk all over them. Also a fair point. Also a very fair point. There's a certain case that can be made for empire, and especially for monarchy. We've seen as of late the effects of what's supposed to be democracy and these sort of extended spheres or economic communities or whatever they want to call themselves. I think a lot of this is trying to have your cake and eat it too. They want a lot of the benefits of empire, but they don't want to be seen as imperial. They don't want to be seen as conquerors. They want empire, but they don't want to call it empire. Because so many of those, especially in the European sphere and in the Anglosphere, have been brainwashed into feeling so guilty over past historical grievances from the Second World War going on back to the Napoleonic Wars and even beyond that. You have a continent that has been ruled by people so full of guilt over the perceived sins of their grandfathers that they think the only way to atone for that is to commit national suicide. And it's worse the closer you get to Germany. It's like that old joke from Yes Minister on the BBC. Humphrey Appleby saying the reason Germany entered the EEC and the common market and what would eventually become the European Union and have been so going so hard on that is because they wanted to cleanse themselves of genocide and reapply for admission to the human race. I think it's rather telling that the victims who survived a lot of that hell many of them did not necessarily carry what we would term a grudge, but they had a sort of forgive but don't forget attitude. A lot of them did. Not all, but a lot of them. It seems the attitude of don't forgive and never forget or conveniently forget certain other things is a way of thinking that has been picked up by the successive generations. And I think a lot of that has landed us in the mess that we're in now. Yes, it is important to learn from history. Yes, it is important that we take steps not to make the same mistakes again. But at some point, you have to move on. You cannot stay stuck in the past. You cannot allow your mentality to remain stuck in the past. You must look forward towards the future. And you cannot go living your life addled with guilt over who you are. Things such as gender, race, ethnicity. These are things you were born with. They're immutable characteristics that you cannot change. You have no control over it, so why feel guilty over it? Why be racked with self-loathing over it? Learn to embrace who you are. Learn to love yourself for who you are. The EU is a joke. Don't like how the UK focuses so hard on them. We should be focusing on people more like us, the Anglosphere. Avoiding the mainland has served us best throughout history. I agree. That's why I was quite the early supporter of Brexit. A Brexit which never really happened, unfortunately. Because Britain finds itself still beholden to a lot of the same standards left over from the days when it was part of the European Union. We never got that full, clean break that was demanded by the people. And I think so long as any prime minister, any political party continues to deny the people what they asked for, which was a full, clean break from the EU, they're never going to stay in power for very long. Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, they need to get serious about that. Otherwise, their growing popularity and eventual victory will die on the vine. Rockita, welcome in. Yo, narrator voice. Hello there.
Happens next. So obviously the peace talks are ongoing right now. China is very positive towards them, saying that Trump's doing a great job at the moment.
Really?
I think they're
That's
wanting
surprising.
to just get this over with.
Yeah.
Like everybody wants to get this over with. I think everybody can see
We're
that the
tired of it.
Ukraine side of the conflict has been a disaster from the start. They were immediately swamped, had a load of territory taken over. They did some counter-offensives and they got some of the territory back. They have managed to push, and on maps, it's literally like, here's what Russia has, and in some of the counter-offenses and offenses that Ukraine has done, here's what Ukraine managed to take from them, and Ukraine has gone, we'll swap territory in these peace deals, but you've got this and they've got that, so what leg do you have to stand on? And
Yeah, they don't have any leg to stand on. There was always going to be a bloodbath with the Ukrainians. And don't forget, Russian troops at one point were marching on Kiev, and then they pulled back. The Russian offensive made it as far as Kiev. They could have just steamrolled the entire thing, which I think is a testament to the level of restraint that is being shown by the Russians. More than can be said for the Ukrainians. I mean, it really says something when you have a firefight break out at the Chernobyl nuclear site. I think recently they had a drone crash into the giant concrete dome. Thankfully, there was no damage. But you see what I mean when I call all this madness. This had to end. And there's no way that Ukraine is going to come out of this with the same that it had before, or more than it had before. They've already deflowered the youth of their nation. Most of their able-bodied fighting men. Those that went to war, it was almost assured they would die in combat. The rest, rather wisely, ran for the hills, along with the women and children. The more you avoid what the people want, the more likely they are to turn to extreme options, because current options haven't done what they said they would. Yes, you will either give the people what they want, or they will take it from you. And rightfully so. And the people don't really care how they get it. But one way or another, they will get it. Because there's still more of them, at the end of the day, than there are members of the ruling class. What's your take on Trump? I mean, on what specifically? I think overall he's doing a fairly decent job. He's kept a lot of the promises that he's made. And it shows with recent polling. People like the guy. People are enthusiastic about what he's doing. I love that he's shaking things up. It's needed to happen in the United States for a long time, and we need to make the same thing happen in the United Kingdom and in Europe. The audits by Doge have brought a lot of truth to light that needed to be aired out, that needed to be exposed to the disinfectant of sunlight. I'm glad that we're freezing a lot of foreign aid. I'm glad that USAID is getting shut down. And we're starting to see positive effects. Because a lot of these AstroTurf protests, they're kind of half-hearted. You can tell they're working with limited resources, and you can tell that, yeah, just as we suspected, a lot of them are AstroTurfed. A lot of them are just psyops. People protesting the trust and like, what the fuck? Yeah. It's like, why would you oppose audits of government agencies finding waste, fraud, and abuse? The only real reason you would oppose something like that is if you stand to benefit from something like that, or if you're just a useful idiot. I like to see what we're seeing here. The US and Russia sitting down and talking with one another. The embassies are reopening. We may finally, touch wood, have a chance at securing a lasting peace. Maybe even the lifting of sanctions on Russia. So my take on Trump right now, he's doing exactly what he was elected to do, which is quite refreshing. Because for so many decades, politicians would get into office and would just renege on all of their campaign promises, or even most of them. This was the Donald Trump we needed back in 2016. But sometimes it takes a bit more time to get what you want and what you need. I shudder to think if we had been on the alternate timeline was Harris had won. I would have said it is genuinely the twilight of America, and for the Western world. And I probably would have told people, prepare for war, because that's what's coming. He was prepared this time, yes he was. He's got a good team with him, and they learned their lessons from the past.
Trump has even explicitly said as much. He says, well, they've got the cards.
It's true.
They've got the cards. It can be very upsetting to some people to hear this kind of thing. Some would argue that it's Russian propaganda.
It's the truth, though.
The mainstream news sources that we've been seeing, Ukraine recently launched 2 major counter-offensives that went nowhere.
Yeah.
And you can go to The Guardian, you
They
can
have
go to
nothing.
the BBC to read.
Ukraine is not equipped to fight the Russians. I would dare say that Western powers, even if they could assemble a coalition of troops, tanks, air power, sea power, I still maintain the theory that the Russians still have the potential to outgun and outrun anything the West can throw at them. But in the end, we do not want this conflict because, remember, Russia is still a nuclear power. And two nuclear powers going up against each other is very dangerous because it increases the likelihood that those nuclear weapons may end up being used. And I don't want to live in a world where that option is on the table. The world has already had to endure the spectre and threat of nuclear war back in the 20th century. And it would be years, even decades later, that we would find out multiple times we came very close to all-out nuclear war over simple mistakes and miscommunications. This cannot go on. Jarrett Lucario, welcome in. Is that the bastard, Carl Benjamin? That is Sargon of Akkad, indeed.
Read that, and you can go to the BBC coverage where you can see all of the maps of territory that's been captured by both sides, and you can see that Trump is not saying anything that is untrue.
So one of the main problems with this is it's important to separate out the sort of morale-raising propaganda in favour of Ukraine from the Machiavellian political
Oh god, it
realist
is.
power politics layer. And on the morale-raising layer, yeah, okay, yes, I mean, I don't like Russia. I don't want them to win loads of territory. I don't want them to do all of these things. But then in reality,
It's going to
Russia
happen.
controls far more of Ukraine than it did before, and like it has leverage using this. Unless we are going to suggest total war with Russia or something.
Yes, the active NATO involvement, boots on the ground, escalating to a full hot war.
Exactly. Unless that's
That's
the only
not going to
option
end
for
well
us
for anyone.
Poland's, then we have to concede that Russia has defeated Ukraine, which seemed.
Hello, Carl. I wouldn't even... Oh. Good thing that got bleeped. Yeah, this is a much older and hopefully a little bit wiser Carl Benjamin. But yes, podcast The Lotus Eaters. Production which he both owns and co-hosts.
Kind of inevitable when you look at the scale of the two countries anyway. And even
Yeah, I
with
sense of
Western
that. I wouldn't
backing,
trust him
Ukraine
regardless.
has got to this point where it wants to negotiate. So, okay, fine, this is the fact.
I never put too much trust in anyone, in any sort of talking head. I just don't. I've seen too many of them when the heat is on and the chips are down. Too many of them fold, and too many of them betray the very audience that got them to where they are, betraying their original principles. So I'm always a bit suspicious about things like that. Especially if he's saying just capitulate Ukraine. No, absolutely not. You do not just invade a modern nation like Russia has and get what you want because it's uncomfortable. Well, the fact of the matter is, Russia's taken what has been ethnically Russian lands, and the reality of the situation is that they're probably going to end up keeping them. And not only that, Ukraine does not have the fighting force to go up against the Russians on their own. And Western powers should not be supplying arms and troop strength to any of them. If that's the case, Zelensky will decide. It doesn't appear that way. It appears Zelensky's been left out of the talks because in the end he's just a proxy. I think of that line from The Godfather where Don Vito Corleone basically just says to this one guy who's causing trouble, he just says Tatelli is a pimp. Zelensky is just another Tatalia. The real powers, the real adults in the room are the US and Russia. And those are the ones that are talking. And those are the ones that needed to talk. They should have sat down and talked many years ago. Instead, you had these mad neocons and neoliberals in the form of Antony Blinken and Victoria Nuland wanting to gin up yet another global conflict over centuries-old blood feuds from their own families that extend back to the Russia of Tsarist times and before. Two people in particular so hell-bent on revenge against Russia for historical slights and grievances. And for something where the people involved were dead and buried long ago, they wanted to try and set the world on fire. And a lot of people just looked at it and saw it as an opportunity to get rich. And a lot of people did get rich. But it was all ill-gotten gains. Now, finally, it seems like the gravy train is coming to an end. Mightn't be able to trust other countries, but we have to get along, though. That's true. You can have a distrust for countries, but you can still have good diplomatic relations with them. Sadly, the only good Russians have probably long since passed away at the time the Berlin Wall fell. I don't believe that for a second, Jared. I know plenty of good people who live in Russia. Wonderful, peaceable, loving people who work hard, care for their families, are trying to make the best lives possible with what they have. And a lot of them will tell you the same thing I'm telling you. But the war has got to come to an end. Peace must be established, and we all need to go on with our lives. Correction, good Russian politicians. I can't really speak to whoever's in the Russian parliament. I think Russians are a lot more like us than others want you to believe. I tend to agree with that, Lux. More in common than we have differences. I believe that too. They just have a lot more struggles than we do here. Perhaps. But their struggles are not going to be helped by the West constantly egging them on into bloody conflicts, one after the other.
You know, whether you like it or not, and whether you support it or not, unfortunately, Russia does have the upper hand in the negotiations. So that's just true.
Ukraine wants to be at the table, but again, given that they've been acting as a proxy for the US for most of this conflict.
Yeah.
So it is the US saying, no, we want to arrange this. And on the regards to the rhetoric, there obviously is a different approach being taken by the US and Europe. Europe being in the direct line of fire. If Russia, for whatever reason, did want to mount more offences in the future against any European countries, they want to have a strong footing, they want to present themselves as being a force to be reckoned with, so they're still keeping up the fierce wartime rhetoric, whereas Trump and America, who are very, very far away from the conflict in practical terms and want to wind this whole thing down, have gone into the concession rhetoric right now. Not without sacrificing their strength, of course, but just being a bit more honest about it by saying things like this.
Just as a quick side as well.
I don't see what's so concessionary about just being honest. To me, that's just an act of good faith. That is bargaining and negotiating in good faith. Which we can do that. We can have those negotiations, we can have those discussions, but everybody needs to come to the table in good faith. Anything less is unacceptable. A line needs to be drawn somewhere because Russia's secret move into Ukraine during 2013 to 2014 was an invasion. If peace can be made, a firm line needs to be drawn that under no circumstances will a breach be made. I honestly don't believe that there's a breach that will be made. I think a lot of it was an attempt to... It was just sort of used as a... The whole conflict was used as a precursor to retake what was seen as ethnically Russian lands. So the whole Donbass region, or eastern Ukraine, that has always historically been home to people who are ethnically Russian. West of that is more ethnically Ukrainian and more of a European blend. Aside from that brief moment in the conflict where troops were moving in on Kiev from Russia, they've sort of just been in a holding pattern, not going any further. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't see Putin and the actions by the Russian military as a sort of imperial force that wants to take over all of what used to be Soviet states or old Soviet republics. I don't think there's any interest in that. From what I have seen, and I don't claim to be an expert, but from what I have seen, there's not even the stomach to do that on the political front in Russia. Nobody wants that. We've seen no desire by President Putin to make that happen. It's just stopping at ethnically Russian lands. It's like, okay, there's the line. That's where we're stopping here. We got what we came for. If there really were imperial ambitions with the Putin regime and with the Russian military, it wouldn't have stopped. You would have seen a much more aggressive push into Kiev. You would have seen them demolish the edifices of government, find the politicians, find Zelensky, and execute them, and say, we're in charge now. And after a brief period of occupation, continue to press westward. Likely facing very little resistance. Or at best a half-hearted resistance, with everybody turning to the Americans and saying, please help us. Because that's how decadent and bloated the Central European countries have become. Not all of them, but far too many of them.
This is a tale as old as time.
Yes.
Where you have two great nations, and when I say great, I mean vast, fighting over...
Powerful, yes.
Yeah, powerful. Fighting over a contested country that is much smaller between them, right? I mean, you literally, you can go back as far as you like the Spartans and the Athenians fighting over Mantinea or Argos, or like the Eastern Roman Empire and the Sasanians fighting over Iraq, or what is Iraq? Mesopotamia. You know, like the
US and Russia fighting over Afghanistan back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah. Or, you know, the Romans and the Carthaginians fighting over Sicily. Yeah, like this is it's such an obvious and well-known piece of warfare that unfortunately it's just true that this still happens to this day, because the world really hasn't changed all that much. It's just how these things work.
Thank you for the lurk, Lieutenant
Is
Yamada.
that area of land that the two great powers are fighting over. It's not an endorsement, it's just the way things are.
Yeah, and ultimately, it does seem that because of all of this, Ukraine, as you might have expected, is going to be asked to foot a pretty hefty bill off the back of this, because White House...
It's going to break them in half, financially. It's going to be a long time before Ukraine as a country, and especially their economy, it'll be a long time before they recover from this.
House officials told Ukraine to stop bad-mouthing Trump and sign a deal handing over $500 billion worth of natural resources, which are half of the country's mineral wealth, to the US to repay it for wartime aid. US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has told reporters that Trump was obviously very frustrated with Zelensky for not accepting the deal. Now, this has a dual role. I think, obviously, you want... America has said...
There's the possibility, the rumor mill has been circulating that these natural resources, they either don't exist, or they don't exist in as great a quantity as to total up to $500 billion. But there's also the possibility that they have been pledged to other countries already. Speculation that Zelensky has been double dealing behind the Americans' back.
Under the last administration, we gave you basically a blank check for as much as you want. So we want to recoup some of that, but at the same time, with Trump starting to put on sanctions in South Africa, which has been a great place for natural resources as well.
We're going to talk about that. I've got an interesting video from Serpent ZA about what's going on in South Africa. He should know better than anyone because he actually grew up in South Africa, especially around the time of the end of apartheid.
For an extra somewhere to get those natural resources from now that South Africa won't be available. So Ukraine, no matter what the deal is, I would imagine that there's going to be two major requirements of them. One, Zelensky will not last as leader. Two, we need to continue our relationship with you in a way that's going to be beneficial to American needs first.
Yes.
Time for a new puppet.
Weirdly, Zelensky seems to actually be acting in Ukraine's best interest here, right? Now, I'm not a fan of Zelensky, but it would have been easier for him to just agree. They probably would have just bought him out. You know, they'd probably been, oh yeah, we'll make sure you're taken care of, and you'll get loads of money. We'll get Ukraine's resources.
Yeah, and Zelensky can just take his Israeli dual citizenship and trot off to Tel Aviv and live in a nice little villa over there for the rest of his days.
Not even necessarily, from what I can tell, saying that we need to extend the conflict ad infinitum. He's saying we want a place at the table so that we have a bit of a better negotiating ground here.
Yeah,
I don't blame him for wanting that.
It's a perfectly respectable...
No, you can't blame him for trying, but we know what he would do. He's an agent saboteur and provocateur. And the only thing that he's going to do when he gets into the negotiating room with the Americans and the Russians is try to throw a spanner into everything. And I'm sorry, but pawns don't get a seat at the table with the kings and the queens and the bishops. That's just not how it works. And Zelensky ultimately is just a pawn.
Thing, actually. And, you know, this... I imagine this has probably improved his profile in his own country.
Well, I think Donald Trump obviously put out the statement saying the other day saying that Zelensky's a dictator, tricked the US into... he's being thrown under the bus. Completely thrown under the bus. If you want to call Zelensky a dictator, well, in that case, Winston Churchill was a dictator for not holding elections during the Second World War as well. This is just how war politics goes. Yeah. You can't just have random governmental changes in the middle of a massive conflict that your country's embroiled in, unless you...
Yeah, no, he's, I mean, exactly right. So, it's all fair points being brought up here. Yeah, it was incredible that the United States even held elections during the Second World War. But then again, they must have been quite sure of their... Roosevelt must have been quite sure of his victory each and every time. Because each and every time he got put right back in the White House.
You want to go with maybe the World War I solution, where that did happen,
like Russia.
Yeah, where that did happen a few times, and you either have one of two things: your country immediately collapses, or your country goes into DEFCON 4. We're going to fight this till the bloody end.
Yeah,
and you end up with a Treaty of Versailles situation.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not a fan of Zelensky, and I did not support us being so involved in the Ukraine war. I think they should have had a negotiated settlement a lot sooner. But I don't actually begrudge him that much. I mean, like, he banned like 2 opposition parties or 3 opposition parties who were openly pro-Russia. It's like, yeah, well, you can't. I can understand why he would do that, because you're literally being invaded by Russia, and the media. Yeah, he did.
Again, during the Second World War,
we did the same thing.
I'm not saying that this was a moral thing to do, but with
you saw it in the United States, you saw it in the United Kingdom, where there were both American and British fascist movements that rose up. And both governments just said no more of this. They said, they put their foot down and said no. This is dissolved, we're not having any of this here. You're either with us, or you're with the jetties over there. Well, that was it. State of war, I can totally understand.
Without even doing anything as far as saying that we should be supporting Germany, Oswald Mosley was just immediately thrown in prison.
Yeah.
For instance, because he
Yeah, for historical context, those of you who don't know who Oswald Mosley was, he was the founder of the British Union of Fascists.
was potentially seen as a threat to the war effort.
Yeah, and so I'm not saying it's right, obviously.
And he was. He had, he drew quite a crowd in his heyday. And all of it with a staunchly anti-war message that came into conflict with the official narrative from the government of, no, Hitler is bad and we are going to war with him. And so when you try to disrupt narratives like that, and you get a bit too effective, the power of the state comes down on you hard. And that's exactly what happened with Mosley.
Obviously, what I'm saying is, on a power politics level, this is what happens when there's a major war that your country is involved in. It's just the nature of the beast, like it'll lump it. So I do think calling Zelensky a dictator has been a bit strong. And when the war, now the war's winding down, and
everyone does a little bit of grandstanding.
Election should definitely be held, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. But again, there's the question of whether Europe, or at least our European leaders, because I think
whether they think the war is over.
Whether they think that the war is over, because
apparently they haven't gotten the memo.
Really scrambling for this, because it's not just the prospect of the war being over. It's the war being over and America very, very explicitly and publicly on a global scale taking a step back from its role in Europe it had had as a peacekeeper and guarantor of particular European safeties. Not that I necessarily think that American regimes have had an excellent cultural impact on Europe, which I'll get into over the past 80 years, but that they will not anymore have the same military influence. So
the war bankrupted us. It would have been better for us if we left Germany be, yes, but would it have been better for Europe? Probably not. Yeah. And in analysing what little I've read about Oswald Mosley, that was one of the key positions that he took, rather publicly. Just saying, we can't afford this. We already sacrificed enough blood and treasure in the First World War. Probably bad for Europe, but hey, none of our business. Let's stay out of it and take care of our own. But again, could be completely wrong about that. I'm no expert.
Now they're talking about things like conscription as the Ukraine war enters third year. There is some disagreement on this, but people, especially like the Latvians, of course it's going to be the Baltic countries, are saying we need to reintroduce conscription. There have been some within Britain saying conscription might be on the table, but that's a bit of a different story. Of course, Keir Starmer, as covered yesterday, has said he would be happy to have boots on the ground in Ukraine to guarantee the peace deals. Now, of course, Ukraine, if there is a
something else I think is important to add. Germany ended up attacking England anyway. And so, based on that, firebombings in London, we had enough justification for war. I'm sorry, you bomb the capital city like that, you are asking for war at that point. And as much as things can be alleged to have been going on behind the scenes, still no justification for something like that. Even more sickening when you think about how an abdicated monarch is believed to have seen the German bombing campaigns against Britain as an opportunity to retake the throne. There's just something so morbid about that. And that's, to me, I think will probably want to be just one of the most unpardonable of sins by Edward VIII.
Transitionary period going into peace will need some kind of third-party mediator for that. And I would prefer Europeans over, as was suggested by, I think, Foreign Policy magazine, just send the third world to Ukraine so that they can guarantee
Jesus,
peace. Because
no.
that's what Ukraine needs after all of this, right? A hefty dose of diversity.
Sorry, send the third... What? As in conscript... Oh, recruit.
Conscript the global south.
I assume recruit the global south.
Yeah, recruit the global south to manage the peace transitionary period for Ukraine.
No. Those people have zero concept of what goes on in that part of the world. We in the West barely have any concept of what goes on in that part of the world. Why the hell would you want to do something so stupid? That has to be one of the dumbest forms of virtue signaling I have ever heard. No wonder Foreign Policy is just such an irrelevant publication.
So again, if
Congolese militants patrolling Ukraine to defend...
Yeah, that's what you need, right?
What?
Oh yeah, Congolese militants. Yeah, I'm sure nothing would go wrong from that. Yes, let's put the Congolese and a Zimbabwean regiment near the Chernobyl nuclear site and see what happens. I'm sure friendly fire would not erupt there at all. I'm sure their stupidity and incompetence wouldn't trigger yet another nuclear accident, possibly even a thermonuclear holocaust, and other horrors beyond our imagination. No, what could possibly go wrong with that? Idiots.
Again, there's the question of like, how well does this all? What's the receipt for Ukraine for all of this? Well, millions dead, economy in shambles, potentially a massive footing bill for the US for all of the loans that you got from them, and then to top it all off, foreign policies like nice diversity as well, a nice injection of diversity. So really, I feel bad for the Ukrainians, man. They've not come out the other side of this.
Pity the Ukrainian people. I mean, they are not their government, but neither the Ukrainian people or the Russian people deserved any of this. Most of them, you go on the streets of Kiev or Moscow, St. Petersburg, heading east into Siberia, And just talk to the people there, on the street. Ask them what they think. Most of them, they just want to be left alone to live their lives. Again, this madness needs to stop.
Good at all. And again, it is not the fault of the Ukrainians on the ground, and even the Ukrainians who, signed up and supported the war. Of course, that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
This was a fight for sovereignty as far as you guys were concerned, but it's really not worked out well. And the rest of Europe as well, through giving so much support to them, all of this money, all of this very, very heated wartime rhetoric, and now off the other end of it, America's like, bye.
And you do have to hand it to the Ukrainians. They fought a heroic fight. Like, I wouldn't want to have to deal with that. That's a terrible position to be in. So it's, you know, the average Ukrainian's, very brave person.
But of course, any NATO-aligned country having boots on the ground, even in a transitionary period, threatens conflict happening depending on just how things work out on the ground. The Economist decided to post this one: how Europe must respond as Trump and Putin smash the post-world
this should be
order.
rich.
It's war order. Right,
Yeah, the post-war order. Yeah, saying Mr. Trump appears to be ready to walk away from Ukraine, which he falsely blames for the war, calling its president a dictator. He'd warned him that he'd better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. America may try to impose an unstable ceasefire on Ukraine with only weak security guarantees that limits its right to rearm. Let us spell out the reality that Europe faces. And this is where I think it's true what they're saying here, despite all of the hysterical rhetoric that they engage with this kind of thing, trying to make it look as though Trump and Putin are best friends. And I see this as an extension basically of the 2016 Russian interference kind of rhetoric. They still can't get it out of their heads that Trump is not just Putin's stooge on the world stages. They just
That was
cannot
never
get it out of
true,
their heads. But
and
still,
it's still not true now. This is a lie that really needs to be put to rest. And yet these elitist establishment arseholes think that they can just keep repeating the same lie over and over again. And think that eventually enough people will be duped into believing it. And that's just not how things have worked out.
if this is what they want to go with it, at least they put bits in here like this that are true. It is Europe is an indebted, aging continent that is barely growing and cannot defend itself or project hard power. Remember, Britain, number 2 soft power in the world. That's what we've got. Global rules on trade, borders, defense, and technology are being ripped up. If Russia invades one of the Baltic states, or and this is where they go into the hysterics again, but, you know, I can understand there is always the concern, or uses disinformation to sabotage and destabilize Eastern Europe, what precisely will Europe do? And this is both a fault...
Nothing.
Strongly worded letter. Possibly
well,
illegal.
Yeah.
This is both a fault of...
You'll get a very stern talking to, followed by a very sternly worded letter.
Europe relying so much on US guarantees for so long, and Europe just generally grinding itself into the ground. And I do think in the long term, if it's managed properly and governed properly, that America pulling away from Europe can give the leaders room to actually begin to fix some of these problems. But with the technocratic globalists that we have in charge of a lot of European countries right now, I don't think that that would be possible. With Macron still in charge of France, people of his caliber, no, I don't think it's going to be possible for Europe to drag itself out of the mire, even if I do think, again, having America out of the picture at least is a catalyst for them trying to do something good.
Well, the question is, does anyone want to fight for the rules-based international order?
No.
No.
No, what is
I mean, what rules? What order? There is no order, it's all disorder. And what rules? Playing a game with loaded dice and a stacked deck that only benefits the 1%? If those are the rules, I'd rather not play the game at all.
mean, to use our own examples, what is Britain offering these people? Do you want to
Nothing.
fight for a country that wants to erase your history, erase your culture? I've seen the recent thing on Twitter going around where it's an English heritage poster, where it's a pair of diverse people saying, we need to preserve our heritage.
It's their heritage now. So, we're just giving it away.
Yeah, do you want to fight for that? No. So one of the good things
laughable.
that might come out of this, and this was an interesting take that I saw from it, which was just the headline here: "Embrace of Putin is a Molotov-Ribbentrop crisis for Europe."
God, they're just constantly fighting Nazis in their imagination.
As though Europe will be split between two spheres of influence: American on the west, Russian on the east, which is. That's not some kind of new crisis for Europe. That was the Cold War.
Yeah.
That's just returning to the Cold War. But during the Cold War, what did we get? We got these new ideologies of diversity start to get sprinkled into the countries, and we see things change into the international liberal world. Although obviously,
I would say that comes after the Cold War.
it accelerates after the Cold War.
Well, the seeds were planted back during the Cold War.
During the Cold War, the ideologies that we come to know as just woke diversity, DI, they were created, but they were a long way away from power and a long way away from influence. And it's not until the 90s where they actually start finding a proper foothold.
Azumi, welcome in.
Intersectionality in 1992. So it is after.
Hello.
Well, during the Cold War, I can see the necessity of having it so that the countries that you have on your side are still homogenous and able to function properly.
It was just the way things were.
And after that, all of a sudden, we don't need them to be as stable. So things ramp up. On a purely Machiavellian perspective, then it makes sense. Keep them stable when we need them for any potential hot war that may erupt. Once the threat of that is gone, well,
it's the end of history now.
It's the end of history. Everybody's just an interchangeable economic.
I hope you're doing well. Are you excited for tomorrow? I am. Looking forward to it. Seems like we have still have a long way to go with It Takes Two. So part 4 is probably not going to be the grand finale. I anticipate a part 5 and a part 6, which is, I don't know. I always have mixed feelings about this sort of thing. Of we've come so far, and yet it still seems like there's still so much more to go. So it's like part of you is excited of, oh yeah, the journey never ends, and then the other part of you is, oh shit, the journey never ends. I know. I thought we were so close the other week. Yeah, same. I think we've gotten most of. Let's keep
unit.
going.
We want them to indulge in hedonism. We want them to be disparate and separated from one another. No communities, because it just means that they spend more.
Well, communities are part of history.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But they point out that this is the Telegraph being a bit worried about America's influence on England in particular following the end of this conflict, saying that MAGA America has a greater natural affinity for Putin's right-wing cultural Weltanschauung, because of course they've got his Nazis all over again. Putler's.
Hang on, right? So that is actually a philosophical term, right?
True.
It's even long before the Nazis.
But Carl, we all know that's not how they're using that sort of thing.
Weltanschauung is just the German for worldview. Basically,
they always have to put it in German, don't they? Because it gets people's.
Make it scary. Make that association known. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you never miss an update. If you have any thoughts, questions, or ideas for future videos, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. You can also follow me on Twitter @LordRexworth for more updates and behind-the-scenes content. And if you want to support the channel, check out my Coffee or Throne pages. Links are in the description. Finally, be sure to visit LordRexworth.com and follow me across all platforms. That's LordRexworth.com. Until next time, I wish you all the best, and God bless.